This is the second of two videos on how to integrate AuthPoint with Radius. In this video, we will discuss how to integrate with Radius when using the MS-CHAP v2 protocol in order to fully protect the IKE v2 and L2TP VPNs with MFA. We will also discuss how to troubleshoot Radius problems when they happen at the end of the video. So let's get started. As you might recall from the last video, AuthPoint is not able to authenticate an LDAP user when we receive their credentials using MS-CHAP v2. So in order for AuthPoint to validate these users, we need to deploy a network policy server into the environment alongside the AuthPoint gateway. To do this, we cannot use the one-time password for MFA because of how the password is being checked. So we will be left with push as the only MFA option for the VPNs after MS-CHAP v2 support is enabled. Here is a diagram showing the authentication flow with MS-CHAP v2. Nothing changes for the firebox. It still sends the authentication to the AuthPoint gateway via Radius. The gateway will detect this request belongs to an LDAP user and is using MS-CHAP v2, and it will send it to NPS via a second Radius request in step 3. NPS will validate the LDAP credentials against Active Directory in step 4, and then inform the gateway of the result. Assuming the user's password is good, then AuthPoint will send the push in step 5 and complete the authentication. In order to get this working, we need to deploy and configure the network policy server and configure AuthPoint to use it. After that, we are free to use the IKE v2 or L2TP VPNs on the firebox with AuthPoint. Here are my AuthPoint resources. We'll edit the Radius client that I configured earlier and enable the MS-CHAP v2 slider. I've already deployed NPS into my environment, and I'll enter the connection information here along with a timeout of 30 seconds. Here on my Windows server, we see the network policy server snap-in. I will need to add two things here, a Radius client and a network policy. I'll find both of those on the left, and I'll start with the Radius client. I've added two things here. In this case, since the AuthPoint gateway will be sending the packets to NPS, I've added the gateway's IP address here, along with the same shared secret that we've configured in AuthPoint and on the firebox. Then I'll create the network policy. I'll name it, then for the conditions, I could add any number of them. In this case, I'll require that users simply be a domain user in order to use this policy. We'll select the default access permissions, authentication methods, and constraints, and under the final settings, I'll need to add a new standard Radius attribute to carry the group information. So I'll click Add, then find the Filter ID attribute, and click Add again. NPS will be supplying the firebox with the group information for this authentication, so this filter ID needs to match exactly what AuthPoint would have sent for these users, either an AuthPoint or Active Directory group name. I'll add my AuthPoint group name here as the filter ID, and that will complete the NPS configuration. The last thing I need to do is configure the firebox. I don't need to change the Radius server settings. The firebox will still send all of the Radius packets to the AuthPoint gateway. So I've just enabled the IKE v2 VPN and made my AuthPoint gateway the default authentication server. I've also enabled my AuthPoint group to authorize the users to use this VPN. After that, I can click on Mobile VPN on the left and download the client profiles, which I'll use to install the VPN on my computer. For more information on configuring the IKE v2 VPN, refer to our documentation and video tutorials. Here on my computer, I've installed the IKE v2 VPN using the batch file for Windows 10 included in the client profiles. This is just configuring a connection using the built-in Windows VPN client, and I can access the VPN in the taskbar under the network icon. I'll enter credentials for my LDAP user and try to connect. You can hear the push came through on my phone, and I'll approve it, and I'm able to connect to the IKEv2 VPN with MFA successfully. So what can you do if you have set up Radius and it isn't working? Well, it will usually come down to a configuration or a communication problem. We recommend starting in the WatchGuard Cloud audit logs after you have attempted to authenticate. If you see a successful login here, but the VPN doesn't work, the firebox may not be configured with the correct group name to authorize the user. If the authentication failed because of bad credentials, the logs here will also tell you that. It's important to note, with Radius, because the password and Radius shared secret are combined, if the shared secret is misconfigured on either AuthPoint or the firebox, it will present as an invalid password here in the audit logs. But what if you don't see anything in the audit logs? Well, that tells us something too. It tells us that the authentication did not make it to WatchGuard Cloud, so then we want to go to the AuthPoint gateway. Here are the gateway logs. Remember, they are under C, Program Data, WatchGuard, AuthPoint, and then Logs. I'll open the Radius logs and I'll find information about any logins that have been processed. If we see the error Radius Client Not Found, that means we need to check our Radius Client resources inside AuthPoint. We may also see errors here if the gateway cannot start due to a port conflict. If we don't see any logs from the gateway for our login attempt, that tells us the gateway also did not receive it. So I would then investigate the gateway services to make sure they are running. I'd check the Windows firewall to make sure it's allowing the Radius connection through, and I'd double check the settings configured on the firebox to make sure it's sending things to the right place. The firebox logs and VPN client logs may also be helpful depending on the issue. That will do it for integrating AuthPoint with Radius Part 2. We covered using Radius with MS-CHAP v2, how to configure AuthPoint and NPS, and how to troubleshoot Radius connections when things aren't working.